So nobody has won a national championship with a roster that was comprised of less than 50% 4- and 5-star players, which means there is a pretty finite number of teams based on the historical evidence who can win the national championship. And this year there are 15 teams that fall into that category that have a roster that has more than 50% of its players ranked as 4 or 5 stars. And Alabama still leads the way by a pretty significant amount. 89% of Alabama's 85 scholarship players were 4-star or 5-star coming out of high school. Ohio State is second with 80%. Then you get to Georgia at 77. So only 2 teams with more than 80% of their roster made of 4- and 5-star players.
That's why you guys were dismissive of Ohio. If they win, let's be honest, when Ohio State meets Alabama in the national championship game, I think that it wouldn't be as, Alabama's winning, no doubt, easy, move on, as some people think it would be. They in Georgia are the only teams in the country that have rosters that are able to beat each other.
Yeah, but Ohio State's roster looked like that last year.
It did. Yeah. And it will be very good again. Alabama has had teams that, lost to Ole Miss, for example.
Yeah.
So, losses won on the road at your rival in a snowstorm can't happen occasionally.
You're right. All high school and junior college scholarship signees count. Walk-ons are not signees, so they do not and are almost never rated ever. Here are some notes from how this stat has performed in the past. Again, no team in the ranking era with less than 50% of its roster made up of 4- and 5-stars has ever won a national championship. So here's some notes, and then we'll give you the rest of the teams. Georgia won the championship last year with an 80% BCR clip, blue chip ratio clip, and they won it all, beating the number 1 blue chip ratio team in Alabama. 3 of the 4 playoff teams were BCR teams, and Cincinnati was the first team since 2017 to make the playoff without a 50% blue chip ratio. In 2020, Alabama's ratio was 83%. In 2019, when LSU won it all, it was 64%, and all 4 playoff teams that year were blue chip ratio teams. Clemson in 2018 won the championship with a 61% mark. Alabama, 80% in 2017. Clemson in 2016, they were the closest, right, at 52%.
Yeah, that's, for all the crap I give Dabo and Clemson fans, their talent evaluation has been unbelievable in the way he's built his program. True, yeah. Their recruiting classes are small. He never signs like 28-person recruiting classes. It was always like 17 to 19, rarely process kids out, and they won at a high level with him. It was impressive, a really impressive run.
That team is built like Bud talks a little later in the article about how he doesn't think this is going to go on forever and that a team in the 40s that has an elite quarterback will eventually break through. That's what that team was. They were talented enough. They had the elite quarterback, and that was good enough to win.
Transfers factoring in is interesting, and maybe that's the reason that he thinks this 40% number could at some point. He says last year transfers are not counted. Transfers are not governed by the same recruiting rules, and though they're important, they are rarely consequential enough to turn a non-contender into a contender. More on transfers and the evolution of the blue chip ratio will be coming soon. Through 2 years of heavy transfer portal activity, national titles are not being won through the portal. Teams loading up on transfers are frequently coaches looking for a jump start to a new tenure, or on the other end, looking for a fix to save their jobs. He does say, but with each passing year, transfers are becoming more ubiquitous within the sport of college football thanks to the removal of the year in residence requirement, opening the door for immediate eligibility. There were more than 1,500 scholarship transfers this past offseason.
If you factor...
Alabama had two huge transfers, too. They had Henry Tuatua and Jamison Williams. They were a huge part of their teams last year, so I don't know how much I necessarily agree with all that.
If you factor in transfers, which he did not, I imagine Ole Miss is kind of close to hitting that threshold.
Certainly closer than they have been.
Definitely closer than they've probably ever been.
So, again, the makeup of the
if
rosters
you're going off their transfer rating.
Yes.
Well, when you include the transfer rating...
Like Mason Brooks was a 4-star transfer, but out of high school, nobody knew who he was because you know his story by now.
Right.
Yeah. Alabama at 89%, Ohio State at 80%, Georgia at 77%, Oklahoma at 71%. Texas A&M goes from 9th a year ago to 5th this year based on the class they just brought in. 70% of Texas A&M's roster is now made up of 4- and 5-star players. Texas is back. Texas is not back. I don't know. Texas is a talent-rich team, 68% of its roster from 4- and 5-star players.
I know yesterday I gave Texas a win in a game that they probably, may or may not have won. Who knows? But you've got people talking about Texas as if they're a title contender, and maybe that's true finally. But we are putting so much stock into Quinn Ewers. We have not seen him throw a college pass yet. It's not like he was at Ohio State and there was some coaching turnover and he started some games or played in mop-up duty. He played in one game, and I thought he threw a pass. I guess he didn't. He took 3 snaps in one game. It was the end of the Michigan State absolute destruction of Michigan State last year. That was the only college football he's ever played. And you've got people talking about how he's Heisman contender, going to lead them to a championship. How about we watch him beat Kansas first?
It's fair. It's fair. And yet the roster is still really, really impressive. Yeah. So 2 teams in the 80% or higher range, 3 in the 70% or higher range, 6 teams at 60% or higher, led by Texas, then LSU, Clemson, Notre Dame, Florida, and Oregon, and then 4 teams that are 50% or higher, Michigan at 59%, Penn State at 55%, Miami at 55%, and they may be a team that you see make a jump over the next couple of years with Mario Cristobal coming in, and then Auburn at 54%, and you look at that for Auburn and you go, how are they what they have been for the last few years?
I'm going to pick Auburn to finish 7th next week in the SEC West. I am. But it's not like Brian Harsin's a bad football coach. It's not like he was a defensive coordinator somewhere is in over his head as a head coach. Dude, he was at Boise State and won at Boise State for a good many years. Like, this isn't new to him. And so with a roster like his, I'm not saying they're going to compete for anything. But if you told me that Auburn found a way to 8 wins, I wouldn't completely just be like, no, there's no way with this roster that's impossible. They had 6 a year ago. And they got better at quarterback, although marginally.
Yeah.
What?
Don't roll your eyes about Bo Nix. You spent years talking about how Bo Nix is trash.
I take Bo Nix 10 times out of 10 over Calzada and Finley. 10 times out of 10. No question in my mind.
What does he do better than Zach Calzada? Because it's not accuracy.
Literally everything.
It's not arm strength.
Literally everything. I would rather have Bo Nix.
Bo Nix has got more arm strength than Zach Calzada.
Have you seen Zach Calzada throw a football, although inaccurately?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's talent there. It's not refined, but there's talent there.
And by the way, based on the blue chip ranking, this Alabama roster, the best ever. 89.4% of its roster made up of 4- and 5-star players. That's insane.